They were chasing me and my sister. It was a regular thing that happened. Not every day, not always the same people, but they had the same mean faces and voices, sometimes waiting at the tunnel like trolls that went underneath the railroad tracks to our elementary school. "Run away, half-breed," they would say. Were they talking to me? Half-breed, really? Sometimes they threw rocks. I was always worried that my little sister Jenny, only 6 at that time, would get hurt. They were like pint-sized Archie bunkers with their parents' words coming out of their mouths. The pain that was caused was not visible. At that time, the scars were subtle and on the inside. We just felt unwanted in our own town. I'll be honest, it hasn't been easy reflecting back on my life because some memories are kind of painful, but others are just regular stuff. I recognize that, I organized what I'm going to talk about into 5 areas. First, my parents, some history about laws, my experience growing up mixed, and Dad's influence as a community activist, and how my role as a UU and a parent has helped me to integrate it all. First, my parents, my mom, Patricia, who's here, came from a family of hard-working farmers and skilled laborers outside of Portland, Maine. She's mostly Caucasian with a bit of Native American heritage from her Abenaki grandma. Our Tapestry genealogist, Jay Kaitan, some of you might know Jay Kaitan, helped my mom to trace her lineage, and it turns out she's a descendant back a ways of the Plantagenets of Europe, and she will be all too happy to explain to you how we're related to European royal families going back hundreds of years to Charlemagne. The Plantagenets are the basis for the violent Game of Thrones book series and the movies and stuff, so it's brutal. My mom, let me see, I'm going to find a couple of pictures. Oh, I'm going backwards. Hold on a second. That's my mom. She escaped rugged farm life, crowded in a house with her 7 brothers and sisters, by opting to enlist in the Air Force right out of high school, to hopefully travel the world and get money for college in the 50s. My dad, let me see, was Louis, also enrolled in the Air Force during the Korean conflict. His mom, whom everyone called Mama, came to America from India via Kingston, Jamaica. And she came to New York, met my grandpa, Ralph, a mixed First Nation and an African American man in Harlem. My mom was working at the hospital at Chanute Air Force Base. And my dad was a corpsman, which is like a medic driving ambulances and MASH buses around, helping people in communities that were served by the base hospital around there in Champaign and Urbana. Mom and Dad met on a blind date to go see Yul Brynner and Deborah Carr in The King and I at the movies, set up by their fellow service members, and the rest was history. They were discouraged from dating, and neither side of the family really wanted them to marry, with a chorus of, "What about the children?" thrown in for good measure, because as usual, folks are much more concerned about babies before they're born. And let me see. There they are. Mom and Dad were married at the little chapel on the Air Force Base in 1957, but not before a mandatory consultation time with their base psychologist, presumably to give them a chance to come to their senses and change their minds, which luckily didn't work. After their marriage, Mom was all but disowned by her family because their neighbors saw my mom and dad coming to visit, and they were upset about seeing my grandparents' Negro-loving daughter and her mulatto children. People think that the northern part of our country was somehow immune to racist, ignorant behavior, but this is not the case. My dad's family tolerated all of us and was nicer to my mom than her own family was. But my dad's mother was still unhappy that he didn't choose a nice East Indian girl to marry. After they finished their Air Force service, we moved north where Dad attended University of Chicago to study social work. Mom tells the stories of her looking at apartments and then came back with my dad and they told her, "Oh, sorry, it's already been taken." And so she'd just go away and then come back and the sign would be back there the next day. Or having policemen come and guard us when we went to the lake and the beach at Lake Michigan, because they were integrating segregated beaches and everyone was like upset about it. So we had to have. Here's a quick history lesson. We think our state is so progressive, right? Well, listen to this. Anti-miscegenation laws, or laws banning white people from marrying black or other non-white partners, have a long history. Northern and southern states alike passed these laws during the colonial era. And by the start of the Civil War in 1861, 28 states had interracial marriage bans. And 7 more passed them before the war's end in 1865. California has banned interracial marriage since statehood in 1850. Under a law passed that year, all marriages of whites with Negroes or mulattoes are declared to be null and void. So that my marriage to Lizzie would be invisible, it would disappear. So in 1943, just a few years before my parents got married, a new law went into effect that required all marriage licenses to indicate the race of the parties to be married. So this law, passed unanimously by the all-white, all-male California legislature, was designed to help the state to enforce its existing ban on interracial marriage. And I was already 7 when interracial marriage finally became legal throughout the country. Let me see. And this family, did you know that June 12 is celebrated as Loving Day? When the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Loving versus Virginia case in '67, isn't it ironic and poetic that their names were the Lovings? I always thought that was good. Keep in mind that at that time, 24 states could strictly prohibited marriage between people of different races. So then, we were kids. Me and my sister thought our folks were just our mom and dad, and we really didn't think a lot about it. But these were turbulent times, and we became increasingly aware as Dad got more involved with the civil rights movement, marching with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers, working with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., organizing freedom marches. Dad became a social worker in South Central LA during the Watts Uprising, in the early one. We got more interested in what was going on in the wider world. When I was a kid, I remember not seeing any people or families that were mixed like ours in school or in commercials or on TV shows. One would think there were no people like us. Now you see them and you don't even think about it. When you're a kid and you see black people in your town and across the country being sprayed by fire hoses in the streets, on the news, on TV, it makes you wonder, when are they coming for my parents or me and my sister? Mothers, like this one, can really make a big difference. I was reading former Daily Show host and humorist Trevor Noah's autobiography, Born a Crime. He says this about his mom. Even though she couldn't afford to give me complete access to the world, she at least made sure to let me know it existed. Because a kid can't dream of being an astronaut if he doesn't know about space. That resonated with me because our mom would read to us and take us to museums, art galleries, and libraries, and fill our heads with ideas and possible versions of our future selves. Mom, I'm so grateful that you focused on us while Dad was out and about trying to save the world. I spoke to my sister when I was putting this talk together, and we pretty much agreed that our mom acknowledged we were different, but convinced us that we were magical unicorn people and could do anything we thought up, like in the book. So, as a preteen, I found Hollis Unitarian Church, which is gone now, but it was in Queens, to be one of the first places where I felt accepted exactly as I was, because it was a multiracial church that was welcoming. Since I've been a UU my whole life, I'm happy that I'm not recovering from some other religion. I also know that my dad's coworkers at the office of the Teen Post outreach program run by the LA Social Services, where he was working in LA, gave him some trouble and accused him of being not black enough to truly engage in the race-related matters of the day, and he had his white wife and kids up in the hills above Pasadena to go home to. They were in the riot zone. This is an example of the cognitive dissonance that being mixed brings. I was too black for my mom's parents and too white for my dad's colleagues. So I was kind of stuck in the middle. When I was 7, we moved to New York, where I lived with cousins who were similarly mixed race. And that was great. Just seeing other kids that looked like us was really fun. And here's a recent picture of us, of me and my cousins. There's nothing like sharing the tough times with relatives as a kid to build strong bonds. We always found ways to make our lives fun. Later, in high school, cruising the streets of Hollywood and learning to drive with my curly black hair and darker skin. I was pretty tan in those days. LAPD often pulled me over, like profiling me, for no reason, and made me stand around outside my beat-up old Volvo while they checked my license, inspected my vehicle, and we called DWB, driving while black or brown. Maybe it was my long hair, which I had long hair then. I think they might have assumed I was a gang kid or something. They loved to profile me, and my mom had to give me the talk about always keeping my hands in view of the officer, making no sudden moves to get my wallet or something, to avoid becoming a statistic. After 9/11, I was regularly pulled out of the security line by TSA officers in a supposedly random way every time I went to the airport, because I guess I looked suspiciously foreign to them. Grayson said, "I remember this happening so vividly, them separating you from the family. It was scary as a kid." So I always made sure to shave right before I went to the airport because my beard grew so fast. I felt singled out as a threat because of my appearance. My dad worked as a community organizer, promoting efforts to change unfair housing practices, redlining, and police brutality around the country. Before cell phones, when the whole world was watching, he would organize community alert patrols, riding around and observing the police as they were arresting or harassing people in the community. And the PD did not like it any more in the 60s than they do now. As part of the Unitarian Universalist Black Affairs Council, my dad was involved with the Black Caucus delegate walkout back in 1968 over the race issues going on in our denomination. While technically Lou was also multiracial, more East Indian than black, he identified as black and worked to help black people and others, minorities, advancing their causes. His family, of course, said, "Louis, you can't be black when we are all East Indian. It's not going to work." And then, let me see. My dad was the associate director for the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization. That's a mouthful. IFCO. We call it IFCO. In 1968, 1 year after it was founded. IFCO was a fundraising and training organization that supported churches, progressive film and media makers, and other organizations, and it's still working today, deconstructing and dismantling systemic racism around the world. In the 70s, Dad was working for a TV station in Fresno and helped produce a documentary about institutional racism there. The title, A Peculiar Institution, is a euphemism used to refer to slavery and the economic ramifications of it in the South. Let me show a little short piece of it.
We're going to take a look at some institutions which are seriously ill. They're suffering from a social disease, and like venereal disease, it's not discussed very often. It's called white institutional racism. We'll look at what it does and how it works. At an East Fresno church, a group of white people have begun meeting to discuss the diseases of prejudice and racism. They started by defining some of the symptoms of prejudice in themselves and in others.
Project Understanding has the basis to work with white churches to become aware and sensitive to our white racism and to effect some kind of change in a year. And it's working with a cluster of churches. It's two members or two staff people working with a cluster of churches.
But prejudice, personal racism, is not the cause of the major damage to black people. It's the more systematic institutional forms of racism that impersonally destroys black and other minority people. At a personal level, racism might cause uneasiness or mild discomfort. For example, when a black family moves into a white area.
I don't know if it's a definition, but it's what I feel my prejudice would be, and that's not understanding those that are different from ourselves.
Mr. Lyle Cook is running for public office in Fresno on the American Independent Party ticket, which was formerly headed by Alabama's George Wallace. Slightly to the right of the growing American Independent Party, the National Socialist White People's Party is only a phone call away.
This is a taped telephone message for the National Socialist White People's Party. Shell Oil Company was bombed. So what? You haven't seen anything yet. This is just the beginning of further things to come. When America goes into race guerrilla warfare, militant groups will take this opportunity to implement their long-laid plans. Every major city will be hit. Water, sewer, power, gas, and communication lines will be blown up. There will be no radio. The transmitters and towers will be blown up. And no television for the same reasons.
Formerly called the American Nazi Party, this is one of the few groups which proudly admits its racism and seems to be preparing for a guerrilla war against black people.
Those with marginal health will not be able to stand the strain and will die. Cities will burn in uncontrolled fire, and the draft created by the heat will create firestorms.
It shows that it also has an interesting clip that I wanted to see. My dad calls on the phone to this white supremacist office, and there's a recorded message. It says, "Black people are going to take over your streets." It sounds so familiar, like it's going to be Antifa, but they didn't have Antifa yet. And it was just Nazis. You could just call them up and listen to their recorded message, and they would tell you, "Join us and we'll help to protect you from your neighbors." So it's dangerous still. And that's why we have the 8th UU principle, and we've been learning about it, and it actually has the specific phrase, working to dismantle systemic racism, written right into it. And I wholeheartedly agree. Dad's anti-racism efforts didn't really connect much to me as a child. I often felt like he was too busy trying to make the world a better place and not spending enough time with us. When I joined Tapestry as an adult, got more involved at the UUA level and going to GA, being active in support of LGBTQ plus issues and supporting my non-binary child, we protested wars because we knew they were actually a way for people of color sometimes to be sent overseas to kill other people of color. Over time, I began to see our faith as predominantly white denomination trying but not always succeeding to be welcoming and inclusive. Since I become a parent and as an active member of our faith community, I see how important it is for me to recognize, name, and speak up about systemic racism wherever it appears, whenever I see things that are unacceptable. But I'll tell more about that in a minute. So before Lizzie and I had kids, her grandfather, Howard Popo Bear, told Lizzie that he just wanted to let her know that she might have mulatto babies, and that was of concern to him, and he wanted to let her know so she wouldn't be surprised when that might happen. he had, like she was like 11 or something, I don't know. Then, when he wasn't being malicious or mean-spirited, I could tell. He came from a very conservative time, and he was a third-generation farmer and businessman in Orange County, born and bred. I wonder how Popo would have felt when our blonde, blue-eyed middle child, Noah, was in high school, and he came home one day, and he was irritated because he was being teased by kids at basketball practice or something for having a Jew fro. Could be a sensitive and offensive warning, but he was appalled that these kids would use this term as an insult. And then when he explained where he got his super curly hair from, they didn't believe him. People would not believe him. We had many conversations around the dinner table about how children may parrot what they hear from parents, and that, according to our UU principles, it was best for the kids to decide what was important to them. And not just mimic back what Lizzie and I said or believed. Also, it's just plain offensive when people deny others lived experiences. At that point in my life, at that point in his teen life, Noah had the realization that he could no longer be a friend to someone who was anti-Semitic and racist. Going back to Born a Crime, the Trevor Noah book, I recommend this book. It's a banned book, and it's really good. I look forward to the movie. He talks about how being a mixed race person, which in South Africa is in the apartheid system, is challenging. You're called a colored person, like a British colored. And it's challenging whether you're born in South Africa or, in my case, middle of Illinois. He wrote that his mother always told him, life is full of pain. Let the pain sharpen you. Don't let it make you be bitter. And that's become a part of my strategy for living in a world where I'm many races at the same time, and I'm always doing a dance with myself and the world around me. I choose to let other people's adversity to my diversity strengthen me, instead of making me bitter. Our family was at 2008 General Assembly in Oregon, proudly carrying the banner for our church in the parade. And the court decision came down in support of same-sex marriage. It was fantastic. The GA even changed its programming on the spot to sing and celebrate wildly. It was meaningful that our kids were able to understand the equal right to marry, and we got to celebrate with them. We talked with them about how laws changed slowly, and how when their grandparents decided to marry, it was illegal for them in over 35 states, and the kids thought it was ridiculous that same-sex couples could not marry, and they flat out could not comprehend how people weren't allowed to marry on the basis of skin color. When I asked for feedback from our kids about how they identify today, they responded that while they feel like they appear and pass as white, they know who they are and who their parents and grandparents are. So they think differently than many of their friends about their own identity. They will check more than one box if they have the option, and identify with mixed race if they can on forms. Archer said that they most often identify as mixed and, quote, try to value their connection to family over how other people perceive their race or ethnicity on paper and in conversation with friends, end quote. As an educator, I have to emphasize Archer's point, in conversation with friends. I'm appalled by what's going on in our country right now with efforts to censor and regulate what people can say or read. Today, teachers are being restricted and told they can't talk to children about what's going on and has been going on in the world. According to Sarah Schwartz at Education Week, over 44 states have either introduced bills or taken steps to limit public schools from even discussing race with students. Some conservative states are working to limit access to many library books having to do with the history of race relations and slavery, or LGBTQ plus liberation in America as well. The current censorship campaign shows how hostile the American public has become to discussions about race, racism, and sexual equality. Please support the educators and librarians in your community. In conclusion, there is an end to this. It's uncomfortable, but as a mixed race person, I just feel like a citizen of the world. I don't feel different. There have been situations that people try to make me feel different, but I don't. Yet, having said that, I can remember how proud I felt when Barack Obama, the American president that looked the most like me of any of them before, was elected, walked on the stage with his family in 2008. The hair went up on my neck, so that quote from the opening rings true to me even more today than when Obama wrote, "Hope is the belief that destiny will not be written for us, but by us, by the men and women who are not content to settle for the world as it is, and who have the courage to remake the world as it should be." Thank you.